So here we're on Daf Mem Amid Beis, and the Gemara now is explaining why we prefer the ribui of lachem l'chol tzarchechem to include kfusa, as opposed to li'achlas and miut to exclude malugma. Marbani is hakfusa sheshava l'chol adam umotzi es hamalugma she'eno shava l'chol adam. When we classify hanos, then we give preference to universally appreciated hanos. Everyone, even the bums on the street, everyone wants to wear clean clothes if they can only afford it. In fact, the Gemara in Darim, it's an unbelievable Gemara, has one opinion in the Tanoim, that if you have two cities that are lacking water, one needs water for drinking, the other needs water for detergent, we give it to the city that needs it for detergent. Again, we're not learning the Dharma. I'm just trying to tell you that there's a tremendous emphasis on cleaning the body and cleaning the clothes that you wear on your body. That is considered a basic necessity of all human beings. But when you talk about medicine, like if you go to the medicine cabinet in our house, you will see medications from yesteryear, from prehistoric times before the dinosaurs walked the earth. Well, I'm not saying that medicine is not important, get yourself, all the medications you need, and if not, I have a good Chinese doctor who will help you. But it's not shaval l'chol adam. You can't say that every person benefits from castor oil. You give castor oil to a healthy person, he's gonna, I don't know what'll happen to his stomach. And this, by the way, reminds me, and I was surprised that nobody pointed this out, of a sugyan beitza, which we'll get to in about 2 months or so, 6 weeks, about ochel nefesh. On Yom Tov, you're only permitted to do melechas ochel nefesh that's shavel ochel nefesh. The Gemara has a hava meaning that you can't check the deer on Yom Tov because venison is something that who can afford it? It's not shavel ochel nefesh. Anyway. So the Gemara says, who is the author of the Brisa that states, as we saw earlier, but now we have another Brisa that expands it. And we're going to assume that this is Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi is going to use the miut of li'achla to exclude medicine from a kiyum of kedusha shvius. It's not considered achila. The Brisa continues, li'achla v'lo lizilu. Again, in the old times, the rich people, in order to give the house a pleasant odor, they would take wine or other fruit juices, and they would put it in some sort of spritzer and spritz the whole floor, the ground of the house. They didn't have granite floors like we have. So the Gemara says that's for mefunakim. How do you translate mefunakim? I don't know. The super sensitive people, that have feinschmeckers, we call them in Yiddish. I don't know in English how you say mefunakim. So it's rare that a person would take fruit juices, which are very expensive, and waste them on fragrance. And therefore, that's excluded from the kiyum of kedusha shvius, just like a medicine, which is only designated earmarked for the cholim, is not shavel chol nefesh. Vital, another miut, li'achlav lo lasos mimena afik toizu, which reminds me of the ancient Greeks. Remember the ancient Greeks? They had these orgies and they wanted to force themselves to regurgitate so they could eat more and more and more. So they used to take this concoction called afiktoizin, which might be a Greek word, I don't know, but it comes from one of those countries. And it was a very sharp kind of beverage, and it would cause them to regurgitate. So those are the few people that use afiktoizin, and they're all excluded from kiyum kedusha shvius because of li'achla. This is not a common accepted li'achla. Kiman, who is the author of this Brisa? Rabbi Yossi. Why did the Bryce exclude from liachla only these weird kinds of benefits? I can give you a classic, common, universal benefit, and it's excluded from liachla because the Chachamim Shita said is that liachla comes to exclude anything where the hana comes after the biur. And in the case of detergent, he wears the clean clothing after the biur, and therefore it's excluded from the kiyum of kedushas shvius. So why do you limit liachla to exclude these weird kind of cases of people who are either mefunakim or cholim when you could exclude everybody in the case of taking peros shvius and using them as detergents? Now, once the Gemara mentioned that in a case where peros shvius are being sold, then the money that's being received has the sanctity of kedusha shvius. You remember that yesterday we wrote on the board tfisas damin. So if you buy an esrog shel shvius from the seller, the money that you give him, unless it was free of charge, becomes kadosh b'kedusha shvius. Amar Rabbi Lazar, ein shvius mischaleles ela derech mikach. What is the proper method by which we can remove kedusha shvius? That's called chilul. Chilul means, so to speak, to desecrate, but what it means is really to downgrade, to remove kedusha shvius, only derech mekach. What does it mean? If you have peros of shvius and you want to remove the sanctity from those peros, you sell the peros on the market, you receive money in return, and the kedusha of the peros is now transferred over to the mos, to the money. However, if you have peros shvius on the table, and here you have a pile of mos, and you want to do what's called pigeon, in Hegdesh there's something called pigeon, you have something that's Hegdesh, you transfer the kedusha from the Hegdesh over to the mos, that doesn't work, says Rabbi Lazar, with regard to shvius. Now we're going to see why in a minute. Rabbi Yochanan, what are you talking about? Bein derech mekach, bein derech chilul. Why not utilize the classic method of chilul, where you have the kedusha in one object, you have mos in the other object, and you make a declaration that the kedusha of the object is now being transferred over to the mos? Why are you being so limiting, Rabbi Lazar, with regard to shvius? And the kedusha shvius doesn't lend itself to chilul in the classical channels, but rather chilul requires mekach. My time with Rabbi Lazar. Now here we have a hekesh between Yovel and shvius. So we have 7 cycles of 7, and the 50th year is sanctified as Yovel. Yovel also produces kedusha shvius. And if we find certain dinim about Yovel, then by analogy, we can derive conclusions about shvius, because Yovel and shvius are identical with regard to kedushas peros. And in the parsha of Yovel, in Vayikra, Perek Chaf Hei, Parshas Bahar, it says, Bishnas hayovel azos, tashuvu ish el achuzasa. Fine. So we have in Perek Chaf Hei, this is Pasuk Yud Gimel, and it mentions Yovel. Now we go to Pasuk Yud Dalet, the very next Pasuk. V'chisim kuru mimkar lamisecha. And that's the Isur of Honah. The Torah tells you can't overcharge or underpay. Why did the Torah place Honah immediately after Yovel? There's not even a breath between the two. Except for the Balkori, you take a self-possible, take a breath. There must be something to be derived from a hekesh between Yovel and selling a field and overcharging. The answer is that it's telling you something about chilul peros of Yovel, that have the sanctity of kedusha shvius, dafka derech mekach, v'lo derech chilul. Just like Onah involves a sale, so too Chilul Kedushas Pero Shvius entails a sale and only a sale. For Rabbi Yochanan, my timer, why does he expand the definition of Chilul in Kedushas Pero Shvius to identify Chilul, classic Chilul, with Chilul Shvius? Classic Chilul means Hegdesh. It says, He, Yovel, He, Kodesh. Okay, this is the previous post. We just had a unit of 2 psukim, Yud Gimel and Yud Dalet in Perek Chafei. Now we're going back to Pasuk Yud Beis. And in Pasuk Yud Beis, when the Torah introduces Yovel, it calls it Kodesh. Why did the Torah define Yovel as Kodesh? Ma Kodesh, to teach me Bein Derech Mekach, Bein Derech Chilul, Af Shvius, Bein Derech Mekach, U Bein Derech Chilul. Just like in the case of Hegdesh, what you do is you machal Hegdesh onto Mos. You don't have to buy Hegdesh. You just simply transfer the Kedusha onto the Mos. So too, in the case of Yovel, which has the sanctity of Shvius, all you have to do is take the Peros and transfer the Kedusha from the Peros onto the Mos. You don't need Mecca. So the Gemara now asks the following question. Rabbi Yochanan, why does the Torah put Onah immediately after Yovel? Meaning you can't be totally oblivious to the smichus here between Yovel and Onah, which is Mechira. Hi v'chi timkru mimkar maya avidle. What drasha is he can derive from the smichus in which the Torah deliberately juxtaposed Mechira and Yovel? And the Gemara answers, "Mi boile lichir Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina desanya." We learned in a brayso, Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, bo urei. This already is what we call agadita, meaning sometimes the Torah is teaching me halacha, and sometimes the Torah goes out of its way to teach me an element of serving God, meaning the chumas havera. We're talking about Kiddush HaShvius, and we're talking about selling something. Now, literally, the Torah is talking about selling something with a charge that's way above, let's say, the market value, right? Overcharge. That's called ono. But the Torah is telling me something about selling Shvius, or Yovel, which is Kiddush HaShvius. Bo ra'ei kamakosha avaka shel Shvius. Adam no save and no save the Pero Shvius. If a person does business with Pero Shvius in order to make a profit, he is a merchant and he sells Pero Shvius, and the Torah says liachla below ischor, and the Torah tells you in the next pasuk about someone who sold his property, what the punishment is going to be for taking Pero Shvius and making them into a business and selling them for a profit. L'sof bocher es metaltalov v'eskelo shenemar shnas hayovel azos tashuvi isha lachuzos v'samotay v'simkru mimkar la'nis. If a person is not knowing Kiddush HaShvius, he's mezalzel and he's a socher and a merchant to make profit on Kedusha, on Peros and his kajim, and at the end, he's going to have to sell his movable property and his kalim. He's going to be poor and destitute. And this is called avka shel Shvius. Why is this called avka shel Shvius? You know that the word avak means dust, but the word avak all over the Shas, all of Allah has a different meaning, a more figurative meaning. Avak is something that has like the smell of something. Like, you know, you can talk about Lashon Hara where you say something really bad about somebody. And then there's something called avak Lashon Hara. You ask him, where can I get a good meal? So he says, oh, John, he's always cooking. You know, that's all they do is cook. you'll get a good meal. That's called a baklish. I think you didn't say anything pejorative about it, but the implication is he's always eating. That's where you go for a good meal. So what do you answer someone who asks you where to go for a good meal? I don't know. That's a different question. For that, you have to learn the Chafetz Chaim, Shvius HaLashon. But be that as it may, the word avak, also it's used very often in ribbis. Do you ever hear of avak ribbis? I'm not really charging you over it, but I'm asking you to give me back something that's worth more than what I gave you. That's avak ribbis. There's something called avak shvius. He didn't take Paris of shvius and destroy them. That would be a real violation of kedusha shvius. To desecrate shvius. But he sold them for profit. That's already a secondary affair. That's called avak shvius. And yet the Torah, in its contiguity, places mechira afterwards to tell you that even for that avak shvius violation, there's a severe punishment. We should learn a kal vachomer, how much more so if he really violates. Rabbi Lazar, after all, you remember that Rabbi Yochanan had a hekage between Yovel and Hegdesh, because in the same pasuk, the Torah calls Yovel Kodesh, implying that it's Hegdesh, which means that you can be machalid by putting the payros here and the mos here, and you don't need Derech Mecca. So what's Rabbi Lazar going to do with that? He needs it for the following brisa. Ki Yovel hi Kodesh. Ma Kodesh Tofes es Domo, Af Shvius Tofeses es Domeo. Which means that if you do a barter deal and you exchange mos for payros shvius, then the domim are tofes, meaning the kedusha shvius will now be attached or chal on the domim. And that's exactly what happens in Hegdesh. That if you make a barter deal between Hegdesh and mos, then the kedusha of the hegdesh, we're talking about kedusha's damim, obviously not kedusha guf. The hegdesh of damim is now transferred over to the damim. That's called tfisas damim. Time.
It's not called sale.
No, this is not a sale. Right? What we're talking about. Right, we're talking about a case of a sale that's mutter. You remember we said, for example, if he's going to use the mos in the very near future for 3 meals a day, and so in all those various cases of a sale, which is not a violation of li'achla v'lo l'machrum, v'lo l'schora, then the mos becomes sanctified with kedushas dam. Tanya kavasi the Rabbi Loza, Tanya kavasi the Rabbi Yochanan, Tanya kavasi the Rabbi Loza. We have a price for Rabbi Loza. Shvius tofeses es domel. Shenemar. We derive it because by Yovel, which is Kedusha Shvius, it says Ki Yovel hi Kodesh tielechen. Ma Kodesh. Just like in the case of Kodesh, is tofes es doma, and therefore the asur, meaning the domim now, after you transfer the Kedusha over to the domim, are sanctified with the Kedusha's Hegdesh. You can't use that money for your own purposes. Af Shvius Tofeses Es Domeha. So too in Shvius, whatever money is given as a replacement for the Kedusha, Shvius the Peiros, is Asura, is sanctified with Kedushas Peiros Shvius. The Gemara asks, if you're equating Peiros of Shvius, in this case Yovel, to Hegdesh, is Ma Kodesh Tofes Damav, the Yotze L'chulin. What happens is that the Kedusha of the Peiros is transferred over to the mos, and the Domim are Tofes Kedusha, but the original Peiros are Yotze L'chulin. Why? Because that Kedusha of the Peiros was now transferred over to the Domim. Therefore, if that's how it works in Kodesh and Hegdesh, is Af Shvius, in Shvius too, that we derive from Hegdesh, Tofeses es Domel, then we should assume, therefore, that the Pri itself is Yotzeis L'chulin. The Kedusha of the Peiros is now removed. And that's not true. because as we're going to see later on, not only does the Damim receive the Kedusha, but the Peros remain Kodesh. Amud Lomer, this is derived from the Pasuk Kodesh Ti. With regard to Yovel, which is Kedusha Shvius, the Pasuk says Ti. The Haviyasa Tehei. Haviyasa Tehei means that the status of the Peros Shvius always remain the same. You can never change and reduce the Kedusha of the Peros. HaKetzad, and the Bryce explains what's going to happen. Lokach b'Peros Shvius basar. Let's say you made a barter exchange, not for the purpose of schor, correct? So instead of paying with cash for Peros Shvius, he paid with basar, basar chul. He gave him a good steak. And the halacha is elu v'elu misbarim b'shvius. The chiyuv biur, which means that, as we mentioned yesterday, after the kol l'chaim and asad, there's no longer any of that produce, of that min of that species in the field, and then you have to do a process of biur and take all the peros of that min out of your house and make them hefker, perhaps, according to one sheet, to maybe destroy them. In any event, it's a chovas biur and applies now to both the peros and the basar. So it means the basar that you paid as a form of a barter exchange for the peros of shvius is sanctified with kedusha shvius, and the peros themselves remain shvius. We'll go to the next thing. Lokach the basar dogin. Now he's got basar that has the secondary transfer kedusha of shvius in the basar, and he makes a barter deal with dogin. Then yotza basar v'nichnasu dogin. Basar is already a second. What would you say in English? A second degree. Excellent. Thank you so much. A second degree. A second degree in a case of a mekach will lose its kedusha. Not the first degree. The original peros remain behavayasan. The basar, which was exchanged for the peros, has kedusha shvius. But if he exchanged the basar for dagim, the dagim now becomes sanctified in place of the basar, and the basar is yotza l'chul. And this goes on and on. Lokach b'dagim yayin, yotza dagim v'nichnas yayin. Lokach b'yayin shemen, yotza yayin v'nichnas shemen. HaKetzad, achron nichnas v'shvius, upri atzmo asur. The last on this whole Chad Gadya will be kadosh b'kedusha shvius, and the peros themselves, which we passed all these degrees of exchange, they still remain kodesh. So the Gemara analyzes Tani lokach. Every single example that the Brisa gives is always an exchange. It's never a classic chilul hegdesh where you have hegdesh in front of you, in this case peros shvius in front of you, and you transfer the kedusha shvius onto the mos. Alma derech mekach in, derech chilul lo. So this is a Brisa that supports Rabbi Elazar. Tanya, on the other hand, Kavasi Rabbi Yochanan, Echad Shvius v'Echad Maser Sheni, Mischalim al Behema Chayav Ha'of, Ben Chayim Ben Shchutim Divrei Rabbi Meir, V'Chachamim Omrim al Shchutim Mischalim al Chayim Ein Mischal. Now, the case that the Gemara is presenting here is that the Brisa drops the word mekach and instead uses the word chilul. If this Brisa would support Rabbi Elazar, reflecting the sheet that you could only be machal peros shvius through a mekach, some sort of a barter exchange, but not simply through chilul, then it would have used the word mekach. Instead, it drops the word mekach and substitutes the word chilul, apparently reflecting the shita of Rabbi Yochanan. But what now is the machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Chacham? You have animals. Now, the animal is worth something a lot, but it also has a value after shechita. It's probably worth a lot more when it's alive, but that's not relevant to our discussion. What's the problem with chilul pero shvius, and for that matter, ma'aser sheni as well, if the animal is alive? So the Gemara says, Gzeira shemi yigadel bohem adorim. If you have a live animal, then chances are you want to breed the animal, right? There were professional animal breeders. And as a result of one animal, if you breed it with another animal, a male with a female, you can get a whole aid there, a whole flock. And now you have something that's kadosh b'dmei shvius or dmei ma'aser sheni, and he has developed an entire Eden. He's not going to be interested in getting rid of this animal, b'shas habir, let's say Chanukah time. Hold on to it and breed and, produce an entire flock. So therefore, Rabbi Meir says, the Chachamim say, Al Chayim ein mischal. We're not going to allow you to do a chilul and take kedushas perush shvius or kedushas ma'aser sheni and transfer it over to a live animal, because we're always afraid that you're going to hold on to this animal way past shas habir. I'm sorry. That you'll hold on. Just 1 second. Just 1 second. He's buying a live animal. Let me just get this straight. He's paying the money for the animal. I'm missing. Just give me a second. Sorry, I know I'm the gun here as usual. One piece of the puzzle. Second. Rabbi Meir. Where's the Gzeira here? Gzeira. Shema Yigadol Behem Adar. Okay, footnote number 27. We are concerned that he might hold on to living animals in order to have them produce offspring. Okay, this would lead him to keep the Ma'aser Sheni sanctified animals. Okay, yeah, that's what I said. I don't understand the Masechet. Drive me a little nuts. Nimtza shemashe es dmei. Oh, I see what he means. I got thrown off by the word dmei. I thought he was talking about money. He was talking about money. He was talking about the live animals. No, he calls the animals dmei shvius. Why? Because what he did was he made a barter exchange between a live animal and pero shvius. And that's where the Chacham get very nervous about that, because then the live animal gets the status of dmei shvius, so it's used as payment in a barter exchange for shvius. It has kedusha shvius, and he's going to hold on to this animal long term because he wants to grow an aid.
And that's after the Zman Biyur?
No. The sale took place way before Zman Biyur, but he's going to be tempted to hold on to the animals, which now have the sanctity of dmei shvius, till way after the Biyur, because he's using these animals to produce more animals.
So the animals that are born from this kedusha shvius animal.
That's only, I think, by Truma. Only, I think, in Truma.
They're not
yeah, there's halacha gidulei Truma. I don't know that there's gidulei shvius. I don't. For that, you have to be.
So the problem
you have to learn Masechet shvius. And the animal will be kept beyond Biyur. Amar Rava, machlokes, and here we turn to the Mem Aleph, bischarim. When does Rabbi Meir have this liberal view and allow a chilul onto live animals? That's only bischarim, because the male cannot reproduce. So it's very unlikely that he'd be tempted to use the male animal to breed and create a flock of animals. And the Chachamim hold that if you can allow him to use a live male animal, then he's not going to make the difference. He's going to already use a live female animal. But if it's a female of Direi Hakol, Even Rabbi Meir would agree that al shchutim mischal al chaim ein mischalim gzera shem yigadel bahem ador. If you're doing a barter exchange with peros shvius on a live female animal, even Rabbi Meir is going to accept this gzera that we're afraid he'll hold on to the female animal in order to breed it and to create a flock. And then he'll keep it beyond Anabir. So we got up to Omer of Ashi here on the top of Mem Aleph. And that's going to be tomorrow's. Thank you very much and have a great day.